My dad hated video games. He threatened to throw my Xbox off the balcony at least 3 times a week. So imagine my surprise when he let it slip that he'd once lost an entire weekend in the 80s to a video game. Dusk until dawn. He said that once he'd finally mustered the strength to crawl out of his cave, made him feeling weak and gross, and I can only imagine that he took a blood vow after that to never play video games again. So after some coaxing and much warning, he finally admitted the title of the game, Zork. Of course, after learning about this game and how it turned my father into a shell of his former self, I looked on Steam and bought the whole thing for $6. So I played it, I explored, and I died. A lot. Zork is brutal in a way that modern games have forgotten. It contains random elements that can put you in an unsolvable state. First rip, a thief took my sword and killed me. When I respawned, I found a knife, staggered back down into the dungeon, and then a troll killed me. So when I respawned, I had 0 weapons, 0 ways to progress. Restart. And this was a hard lesson in the school of manual saving that I had forgotten. So in the future I did so, obsessively. This game is a masterclass in delicious little secrets. It never tells you about its own mechanics. Choose to fight the thief with a nasty knife instead of a sword, and his health and his attack become much weaker. The developers wrote that line of code, tested it, and just left it in there for players to discover by accident. No tooltip, no quest marker, nothing. Just a hunch that using this nasty knife somehow helps you get revenge on that thieving bastard. And the puzzles in Zork share that same love in the recipe. For example, there's a bejeweled egg that you can find within the first 10 moves of the game. To open it, you can drop it from a tall height. You can throw it from the tree. Or you can take it into the dungeon, leave it for the thief to find at some point. Then later on, towards the end game, you can kill the thief and take the egg back, and you find that he's opened it for you. Or if you don't have that much subtlety, you can also just find a screwdriver on the map and jam it open. None of these paths are explained. At best, you get some very subtle illusions that you have to piece together yourself. But all of it works, and it makes the world feel like it exists, whether you are playing and paying attention to it or not. And because this is a text-based game, the map feels enormous. There are times where you have to drop items to manage your inventory. You can't use the inflatable raft if you have a nasty knife in your pocket. Something I got stuck on for a good hour was garlic. I dropped a brown paper bag with garlic in it somewhere in the forest. Little did I know that I would desperately need it to get past a vampire bat that was guarding some treasure. So I stomped around this game, room to room, north, east, south, west, until I finally shambled across a place in the dirt where I so carelessly dropped it. And it was things like this that kind of made it addicting. So like father, like son, I spent a weekend lost in the underground empire. In the 70s, video games were simple. Pong, asteroids, space invaders. You move 1 pixel to hit another pixel. There was also a game called Colossal Cave Adventure. It was a little bit different. It was text-based. You typed commands to it, but the ceiling was low. Kill goblin, get lamp. 2 words, that was your maximum. And a group of 4 guys at MIT saw this and thought that they could do better. Instead of get lamp, you could say, pick up the brass lantern and put it in my pack, and it would work just fine. And this was no small ambition. Natural language parsing in the 1970s was this web of rigid trees and grammatical rules. Not to mention placing that on a very not powerful personal computer. But these guys built it anyways, and Zork was born. They also founded Infocom, and by the time they released it commercially, the parser of Zork understood 900 words and 70 action verbs, give or take. The MIT mainframe that hosted the original version, the PDP-10, actually allowed the creators to watch players type in real time. So when players kept using a word that the game did not recognize, they would just add it to the dictionary. The original Zork occupied an entire megabyte of MDL code. It also took a staggering 0.5 megabyte of RAM to run. There were some universities that had gotten a hold of the executable over the ARPANET, and it was becoming so addictive to students and teachers, and it was so resource heavy and clogging their mainframes that sysadmins ended up hiding the files so people wouldn't play it. They'd write scripts to kill the process if anybody tried to run it from the 9 to 5. They were going to war with Zork. So those were the constraints for mainframes. So when Infocom wanted to release it commercially to home computers, there was one massive problem. Computers of the late 70s were weak. We're talking 16 to 32 kilobytes of RAM. So trying a direct port was going to be impossible. So what was their solution? Write a fictional computer, of course. Gathered around a literal coffee table in Pittsburgh in 1979, these guys sketched out the architecture for a virtual machine they called the Z machine. It was an optimized virtual microprocessor built for the sole purpose of text adventure games. They also created their own programming language called ZIL and a compiler for it called Zilch, which would take the code and compile it into story files. These contained the instructions and the opcodes for the virtual Z machine. And because they created this virtual machine, the only thing they had to do to port it to different platforms was just write an interpreter for the Z machine. This lets them avoid having to rewrite the entire game for every single platform. And keep in mind that this is more than a decade before Java and the JVM came out. And even compressed with this virtual machine, the game still occupied about 100 kilobytes of RAM, which still wasn't going to fit onto a 32 kilobyte computer. So these guys pulled off another miracle. They introduced what is arguably the first ever use of virtual memory on a microcomputer, dynamically swapping data off the floppy disk and RAM in real time. These guys also figured out how to instantly freeze, save, and restore the entire execution state of the Z machine, which makes me think maybe I'd be a better engineer if I had harder constraints than abundance. And the parser itself is where I genuinely lose sleep. The original PDP-10 mainframe version occupied 44 kilobytes, 10,000 36-bit words of MDL code. The Z machine version occupied 3 kilobytes. They built a shallow but brutally effective pattern matcher. Find the verb, find the subjects, find out what's in between, run it against a dictionary. And the save system, which I cursed repeatedly when I neglected it, is just a raw serialization of the entire execution state of the machine. Memory, stack, program counter, everything. I mean, compare that with modern games that autosave every 30 seconds because persistent state's pretty trivial and player frustration's expensive. I kind of like that Zork makes you type save because it's kind of a ritual commitment to the poor decisions you've made thus far. When your ceiling is 32 kilobytes and a floppy disk, every decision you make matters a lot. When your ceiling is a 2 terabyte hard drive, 32 gigabytes of RAM, you keep adding crap until somebody asks you to stop. We all know who I'm talking about. So I keep thinking about what it must have felt like in the 80s when my dad played this. You're sitting at a computer that costs more than your car, typing in plain English and having the machine answer back. It probably felt like, at least for a weekend, that the future had come. And since then, Zork has been ported to every platform that's existed. It takes nothing to run. You could boot it on a calculator. The game outlasted the company that made it, the original platforms that it ran on, and pretty much everything after. In 1,000 years, I like to think that there's going to be some digital equivalent of a Rosetta Stone, and I would bet a lot of money that Zork is going to be on it. I don't even think Dad could argue with that.